Chapter 8. Do, what shall I do? And now, my dear, said Madam Mumblechook, classes are over for the day. If you will come to my office and put your name down, I shall give you a prospectus, and we shall expect you in the morning. Mary got to her feet, relieved, and half ashamed of her fear. The book weighed heavy in her pocket. She put her hand down, hoping to slip it back unnoticed into its place. But Madam Mumblechook came swiftly round the desk to pause right beside the bookshelf, and it was too late. My books, the headmistress was saying, swooping on them with a rustle of the black robes. If you will just give me a moment, I will lock my books away. At night they go in the strong room. None of them leaves this room. I'm sure you understand why, Miss Smith. And she took the dozen or so books from the shelf and made for a door that Mary had not noticed, right behind the teacher's chair. Madam Mumblechook, began Mary guiltily. One moment, said Madam. Silence, if you please. Mary stopped. Madam Mumblechook, with the pile of books held against her chest, was facing the strong room door, and chanting something very softly under her breath. Mary could not hear the words. There seemed to be no lock or key on the door, only a bronze handle shaped like a seahorse. Madam laid hold of this and pulled. There was a series of clicks, smooth and oiled, and the door began to swing open. It was a huge, heavy door, made of metal, and at least 9 inches thick. To Mary's surprise, there was a light inside the strong room, not green this time, but a dim, ordinary yellow, like an oil lamp. Madam Mumblechook left the door standing wide, and went in with the books. Would you be so good, Miss Smith, as to bring the papers off my desk? She called. And the paperweight as well, of course. I always lock him up at night, along with the others. One can hardly be too careful, can one? And she gave a little chuckling laugh. It was Mary's chance. She pulled the red book from her pocket, picked up the pile of papers and put them on top of it, then carried the whole lot, with the glass frog, into the strong room. And the strange thing was that Tib ran ahead of her, pulling eagerly on the raffia lead. There was a big cupboard just inside the door, and in this Madam Mumblechook was stacking the books. I suppose you want this as well, began Mary. I was just looking. Then she stopped dead, with a gasp. She had seen what else the strong room contained. To begin with, it was a far bigger room than she had thought. It was almost as big as the lab, and the soft light of the lamp near the door had only illumined the end of it, leaving the rest in shadow, mercifully in shadow. The whole of the long, dim room was lined from floor to ceiling with cages. They were barred and meshed, and stacked on one another like the shelves in a huge library, and there were bays where other ranks of cages stuck out from the wall. Some of the cages, those nearest the door, were empty, but from those further back in the shadows peered eyes. The eyes of small creatures, silent and staring, caught by the lamplight. Here and there was a movement as a paw or a tiny foot reached through the bars, but mostly the little creatures, whatever they were, sat huddled and silent in the dark corners at the back of their prisons. Madam Mumblechook turned at Mary's gasp. Interesting, is it not? I thought you would be impressed. Some of our students have reached quite advanced experiments in transformation, but of course we have our failures. She laughed merrily as she pointed at the nearest cage where a forlorn-looking creature, its orange fur patched with scales like mange, lay unheeding, its back to the room. It had put 2 crooked paws over its eyes to shut out the light, and seemed to be sleeping. But Mary suspected that it was very wide awake. She had already recognized one of the drawings from Madam's desk. Marvelous, she said. Madam Mumblechook leaned over the cage, prodding irritably at the creature, which would not move. Without pausing to think why she did so, Mary slipped the red book of master spells back into her pocket. Here are your papers, madam. Ah, thank you. Madam Mumblechook, abandoning the caged creature, thrust the papers and the glass frog into the cupboard and locked the door on them. She had not noticed the absence of the book. I will show you round in more detail tomorrow, my dear. But now you will want to be getting home. Oh yes, please. Mary would never have thought she could be so thankful at the prospect of going back to Red Manor and Great Aunt Charlotte. And I'd better hurry, madam. They'll be missing me soon. Then we shall hurry. And the headmistress moved quickly towards the strong room door, her black robes rustling about her. Mary followed close on her heels, pulling Tib, who for some reason seemed reluctant to go with her. Then they were out in the lab, and behind them the strong room door shut with a smooth clunk. The lab was deserted now. The students had all gone. The burners were out. Only the furnace burned green and roaring. Tib was still dragging at the lead. Mary stooped quickly and picked him up and held him tightly. This time he neither spat nor scratched, but she heard him growl deep in his throat, and she felt him still quivering with that queer tension and excitement. She followed Madame Mumbler Ch8 out of the lab and along the corridor. The headmistress's office was a pleasant, business-like place, and very ordinary, with shelves of books, quite ordinary books like Who's Who, and What's What, and Teach Yourself Magic, and a typewriter and a big desk. Mary stood restlessly near the door, hugging the invisible Tib, while Madame Mumbler Ch8 lifted a big ledger from a drawer and spread it open on the desk. Name. You still wish to go by the name of Mary Smith? Mary opened her mouth to protest yet again that it was her real name, then stopped. There was no point, after all, since she would not be coming back. Yes, please. The headmistress was inscribing the name in that bold, flowing hand that Mary recognized. Very well. Mary Smith 64. She was writing it, Mary noticed, as 64. Madam underlined this carefully. There. That is how you will be known among us. Address. Red Manor, Shropshire. Madam glanced up at that, her eyes suddenly very piercing. Indeed. She seemed to be about to say something further, but merely raised her brows, nodding, then turned back to the ledger. And now Mary, craning forward, could see what had surprised her. The previous entry looked almost exactly the same. It ran, Mary Smith 63, Red Manor, Shropshire. Madam closed the book with a snap. So that is that. Delighted to have you. She dropped the book back in the drawer and handed Mary an envelope. Here is our prospectus. We will discuss fees later, but believe me, we shall be most grateful for your generous donation. So many prospective pupils have no idea that a little initial gift is not only very acceptable, but, shall we say, an excellent start to one's college career. When you have had time to think it over, I am sure you will see it in this light. I don't understand, said Mary. Madam smiled kindly. All in due course, my dear, all in due course. At the moment everything is so new to you. Tomorrow at 10 then, and we shall discuss your classes. A little distilling I think, and some practice with the astrolabe for instrument flying. But I really think, that your father's daughter can go straight on to transformation. Thank you, said Mary. She was glad to hear that she did not sound nervous, only slightly worried. And now I really think I'd better hurry home, madam. My great aunt likes me to be washed and changed by 6:30, and, badness me, said madam mildly, looking at the clock on the wall. Then certainly you must be going. I'm afraid that our private landing strip is locked now, except for residents, but Danny will have your broomstick ready at the door. And he was waiting at the foot of the front door steps in the thick dusk, holding the little broomstick, which stood quite still in his grasp, just like an ordinary broom. So like an ordinary broom that Mary, running down the steps with relief in the fresh evening air, had a moment's terrible doubt. Had this morning's journey really been true? Had she really flown? And could she fly again? Will it know the way? She asked anxiously, and Mr. Flanagan grinned cheerily. It will that. They are each after having their own runs, and this one will be getting you there with a leap like a blooming grasshopper. If you can stay on, that is. Come along then, me dear. I'll hold him the while you'll be mounting. Be easy now, will you? This to the broomstick, which began to sidle and skip as Mary tried to mount it. Let me hold the cat, said Madame Mumbler Ch8, and lifted Tib from Mary's arms. Tib was growling and grumbling audibly now, his voice rising to a squall, as Madame Mumbler Ch8 busied herself tying the end of the raffia lead to the broom handle. Stand back now, cried Mr. Flanagan. Hold on, me dears. And he gave the little broomstick a slap, and shouted, Home with ye now. It did work. It was just the same, except that this time the broomstick tried no tricks, but rushed smoothly up into the air on a trajectory like a rocket. The birch twigs whistled in the air like a tiny jet engine. Then the broomstick curved out over the huge trees at the edge of the park, and fled for the last bright gap in the heavy clouds of evening with a speed that took Mary's breath from her lungs. It had taken Tibbs too. As they left the ground with that tremendous leap, his squalling had checked as suddenly, as if he had choked. The clouds swirled round her, indigo and grey and aubergine, then suddenly golden, all smoke and flame and tossing fire. But this time she hardly noticed their beauty. She held on tightly to the broomstick, calling out to the silent Tib, and watching for the break in the sea of cloud which would mark the beginning of their descent. Here it was, a great gap of darkness, like a lake of black water. The broomstick tore through the firelit surf of cloud at the edge of the gap, then plunged steeply down into the evening dusk above Red Manor. It skimmed the top of the lime tree, and the autumn leaves, torn off in its wake, swirled round Mary's head like a cloud of bats. There was a swish and tossing of twigs, and the broomstick jerked once as if it had hit something, or as if, thought Mary, clinging like a burr, Tib had jumped clear into the lime boughs. And indeed, when the broomstick ran to earth in a long wake of blown leaves along the lawn, and she turned to look, the raffia lead had gone, and no warm fur met her hand as she stroked it along the twigs of the besom. "Tib, Tib, come down," she called softly, dismounting, and staring up into the twilit boughs of the big lime. She could see the raffia lead, caught from some high branch, swinging with the collar obviously empty. Tib had pulled himself free, and though surely not still invisible, apparently was not yet ready to come to her. Mary ran down the path towards the kitchen garden, and put the little broomstick back in its place with a pat of thanks. With a soft flirt of wings and a faint chirrup, the robin flew up on the wall by the tool shed, and began to sing. There were daisies all along the edge of the path, and by the door as she ran in the evening primroses shone pale and scented in the dusk. Everything was normal and ordinary, and very comforting, and there in the kitchen was Mrs. McLeod just putting the pans on the stove for supper. "There you are. Did you have a good day now?" "Lovely, thank you," said Mary. "Is Aunt Charlotte home yet?" Mrs. McLeod looked amused. Double quote. "You've beaten her," she said, "but only just. I can hear the car there now. Run, lassie." Nobody had asked any questions that could not be answered. The old friend had apparently been good value, and Great Aunt Charlotte and Miss Marshbanks spent a happy supper time talking about their day. For once Mary was pleased that they seemed totally uninterested in hers. At last she escaped up to her room. The first thing she did was to run across to the window and pull the curtains wide. Nothing but sky and stars. The clouds had cleared, and a fresh young wind tossed the lime boughs. There was no cat waiting on the windowsill. She pushed the sash up and leaned out, calling softly. No reply. Mary began slowly to undress, knitting her brows with worry. Supposing Madame Mumblechook were wrong, and Tib couldn't get his visibility back at will. Suppose the spell had been different from her own. Suppose. Then she remembered the book, and put a hand in her pocket, half expecting the book to have vanished too. But it was safely there, the embossed cat and the circle of lettering winking in the electric light. Mary fingered it doubtfully. Not tonight, perhaps. No. This was something to be looked at tomorrow, when the sun was shining. Somehow, here in her own room, the book looked uneasily out of place, not belonging to the same world as the daisies, and the smell of the lime tree, and the robin's song. But there was Tib. Well, Tib was probably all right anyway. Cats could cope with magic, they had told her. And in any case, Tib would have to be here himself for any kind of spell to work. She put the book on her dressing table, and then noticed, sticking out from between the pages, where she must have pushed it, the envelope Madame Mumblechook had given her with the college's prospectus. She picked it up. This was different. Since she had no intention of ever going there again, it would be fun to have the prospectus to keep and read. Now that she was safely back at home, the adventure was pleasant enough to remember. Apart from Tib's accident, everything had gone well, and they thought she was a wizard's daughter. Mary grinned to herself at the thought of Daddy making himself invisible. She would enjoy showing him the prospectus, and Mummy too. How people would stare when they knew that there was a college for witches, only a broomstick's ride away from Red Manor. She wondered if there was a picture, or even a map to show you how to get there. She opened the envelope. A slip of paper fell out. On it was written, in that big bold hand, received with thanks of Miss Mary Smith 64 of Red Manor in Shropshire, one familiar for transformation experiments, and an initial below which looked like M.